The greatest tactical victory in the history of the Outer Rim wasn't planned by a brilliant general. It was caused by a keystroke error in a lunar cubicle. They sent a broken human weapon to a pacifist paradise, never realizing the galaxy was about to meet its worst nightmare. The Department of Extrasolar Affairs in New Geneva was a sprawling, sterile labyrinth of bureaucratic monotony. In cubicle 412B, a junior logistics coordinator named David Collins was battling the severe effects of caffeine withdrawal and a rapidly approaching weekend deadline. His terminal was overflowing with reassignment forms for returning veterans of the brutal Centauri incursions. Most were straightforward transitions into military instruction or high-security private sector work. But Form 8804, A, was anomalous. The file belonged to Sergeant Major Arthur Pendleton, a 22-year veteran of the 1st Earth Orbital Shock Infantry, the legendary Helldivers. Pendleton's file was highly classified, severely redacted, and heavily flagged with medical warnings. He had survived the catastrophic siege of Vega 9, an engagement that had seen a 94% casualty rate. Pendleton was supposed to be routed through Code 41 Delta, a highly supervised, heavily sedated combat reconditioning facility on the ice moons of Jupiter. David Collins rubbed his bloodshot eyes, his fingers slipping on the archaic, tactile keyboard. Instead of 41 Delta, he punched in code 41 Alpha. Code 41. Alpha was an interspecies agricultural cultural exchange program. It was designed for soft-spoken botanists, civilian diplomats, and university students looking to broaden their horizons on peaceful allied worlds. The system, completely devoid of basic human intuition, processed the request without a second prompt. Within milliseconds, the most lethal, highly augmented, psychologically scarred shock trooper in the Earth Defense Coalition was officially documented as an agricultural diplomat and scheduled for immediate transport to a deep space civilian zone. 3 weeks later, Arthur Pendleton stepped off a commercial civilian transport shuttle onto the sun-drenched landing pad of Xylos 9. Known affectionately in diplomatic circles as the Cradle. Arthur was a man who looked like he had been constructed out of scarred leather and repurposed artillery plating. He stood 6'4", his broad shoulders stretching the limits of his poorly fitted, mandatory civilian beige tunic. A synthetic polymer graft ran from his jawline up to his temple, housing a cybernetic left eye that whirred faintly as it rapidly auto-focused, scanning the environment. The moment his heavy combat boots touched the permacrete, his brain immediately processed the tactical layout. Zero cover, open sightlines from the northern ridge, civilian transport ships unarmored and clustered too tightly, an ideal kill zone for mortar fire. Arthur gritted his teeth, forcing his hands out of fists. He was supposed to be resting. The military doctors had told him this assignment was a mandatory step in his rehabilitation, a test of his ability to reintegrate. He had no idea what a cultural exchange entailed, but orders were orders. Waiting for him at the base of the boarding ramp was a welcoming committee that made Arthur's synthetic eye twitch. Standing beneath a vibrantly colored parasol was Lyrian, an elder of the Vale species. The Vale were a slender, towering avian-descended race, standing nearly 7 feet tall with delicate hollow bones, iridescent feathers, and wide, trusting eyes. They were a fiercely pacifistic society. Their planetary archives proudly boasted that they had not experienced a single act of armed conflict in over 4,000 years. They didn't even have a word for murder in their primary dialect. Beside Lyrian stood Dr. Amelia Cartwright, a human botanist assigned to the colony for the past 3 years. She looked at Arthur with a mixture of profound confusion and rising alarm. She had expected a PhD candidate from the University of London. Instead, she was looking at a man who appeared capable of tearing a blast door off its hinges with his bare hands. "Greetings, traveler," Lyrian chimed, their voice a melodic, resonant hum. "We welcome you to the Valley of Endless Harvest. We are deeply honored that Earth has sent another scholar of the soil to share in our peaceful bounty." Arthur stared at the alien, his good eye narrowing. He gave a stiff, mechanical nod. "Sergeant Major Pendleton," he grunted. his voice a gravelly rasp that seemed entirely too loud for the tranquil environment. "Where is the armory?" Dr. Cartwright stepped forward, nervously adjusting her glasses. "Mr. Pendleton, I'm Dr. Cartwright. I think there might have been a misunderstanding. There is no armory here. Xylos. 9 is a demilitarized zone. We grow luminescent grain and study atmospheric condensation." Arthur looked at her, his tactical brain failing to compute the words. "No armory? What about the planetary defense cannons? Orbital defense grid?" We we don't have those," Lyrian explained gently, tilting their head in innocent bewilderment. "Why would we need such aggressive architecture? The galaxy is a place of shared commerce and mutual understanding." Arthur stood in silence for a long moment. He looked at the rolling, idyllic hills of vibrant purple grass, the crystalline rivers, and the completely unguarded atmospheric processors. To the Vial, it was paradise. To a helldiver who had spent 2 decades fighting nightmarish terrors in the mud and blood of the Orion sector, it was a glaring, unprotected target. "Lead the way to the barracks," Arthur finally muttered, hefting a heavy duffel bag that contained the absolute maximum allowance of personal survival gear the civilian transport would permit. Over the next few weeks, Arthur became the most jarring anomaly in the history of Xylos 9. The Vial were fascinated by him, though mostly terrified. He was assigned a modest plot of land and a habitat on the edge of the central settlement. While the Vale farmers used gentle, melodic tones to encourage their crops to grow, Arthur approached farming like a military siege. He dug irrigation trenches, but Dr. Cartwright quickly noticed they were exactly deep enough for a human to stand in, angled perfectly to deflect explosive shrapnel. He reinforced the walls of his simple agricultural habitat with compressed earth and dense titanium alloy plating he salvaged from a scrapped transport engine. He spent his nights running perimeter patrols, his cybernetic eye cutting through the darkness, scanning for threats that the colony believed didn't exist. Amelia tried to intervene, attempting to coax the veteran into the peaceful rhythm of the colony. She invited him to communal meals, where the Vale discussed philosophy and poetry. Arthur sat in the corner, his back firmly against a solid wall, analyzing the room for choke points and identifying which pieces of dining furniture could be utilized as blunt force weaponry. He was broken, a man trapped in a war that had supposedly ended. But deep down in his marrow, Arthur Pendleton knew a universal truth that the peaceful Vale had long forgotten. Peace was not a natural state of the universe. Peace was an anomaly, a fragile bubble. And bubbles always pop. Life in the Valley of Endless Harvest was an agonizing test of endurance for Arthur. His body, chemically engineered to require mere hours of sleep and to thrive on adrenaline, rebelled against the quiet. The silence of the colony was deafening. To a soldier accustomed to the constant, rhythmic thump of artillery fire and the screaming sirens of proximity alarms, the gentle rustling of the luminescent grain felt like the calm before an ambush. 2 months into his deployment, Arthur was working in the northern agricultural sector. He was manually tilling the soil, a grueling physical task he had volunteered for simply to burn off his excess energy. His heavy combat boots sank into the rich, purple loam. Dr. Cartwright was a few dozen yards away, taking soil samples and casting worried glances at the giant of a man who worked with terrifying mechanical efficiency. Arthur paused, resting his calloused hands on the handle of his industrial tiller. His cybernetic eye whirred, recalibrating. He tilted his head toward the sky. "Do you hear that?" Arthur asked, his voice low and tight. Amelia looked up, pushing her glasses up her nose. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless azure. "Hear what, Arthur?" "It's just the wind." "No," Arthur said, his posture instantly shifting. The slouch of a weary farmer vanished, replaced by the rigid, coiled tension of a predator. Suborbital thrusters, atmospheric friction, unregistered signature. Before Amelia could question him further, the colony's central plaza, roughly 2 miles away, was suddenly bathed in an eerie, flickering crimson light. A split second later, the deep, guttural roar of descending spacecraft shattered the tranquil silence of Xylos 9. Arthur dropped the tiller and sprinted toward the ridge overlooking the settlement, his augmented legs chewing up the distance at a terrifying speed. Amelia struggled to keep up, her heart pounding in her chest as the reality of the situation began to dawn on her. When they reached the crest of the hill, Amelia let out a gasp of horror. 3 heavily armored, jagged dropships had slammed down directly into the central plaza, crushing the delicate marble statues and tearing up the communal gardens. They were brutal, ugly vessels, painted in a flat, radar-absorbent black, bearing the unmistakable crimson insignia of the Iron Corsairs. The Corsairs were a notorious syndicate of raiders and mercenaries, operating on the fringes of Coalition space. They were commanded by Hector Garrison, a disgraced former Earth Coalition fleet captain who had turned to piracy, leading a ruthless crew of human outcasts and predatory alien mercenaries. They preyed on the weak, stripping frontier colonies of resources and taking captives for the deep space slave markets. Garrison had somehow learned that Xylos 9 was sitting on vast, untapped reserves of rare geological isotopes, and more importantly, that the planet was entirely defenseless. From his vantage point, Arthur watched as the dropship ramps lowered. Dozens of heavily armed pirates poured out into the plaza. They were equipped with surplus military gear, plasma rifles, kinetic shotguns, and heavy exosuits. The reaction of the Vial was tragic in its innocence. Lyrian, the elder, stepped forward from the panicked crowd, raising their long, elegant arms in a gesture of peaceful greeting. They did not understand the weapons pointed at them. They believed this was a severe diplomatic misunderstanding. Travelers. Lyrian's melodic voice echoed through the plaza, amplified by the natural acoustics of the valley. You arrive with great urgency. Please, lay down your heavy burdens and join us in the pavilion. We have food and water for the weary. Hector Garrison, stepping out of the lead ship in a custom-fitted set of powered armor, laughed. The sound was harsh and metallic through his helmet speakers. He casually raised a heavy kinetic pistol and fired a single round into the ground inches from Lyrian's feet. The resulting explosion of permacrete sent the elder falling backward in shock. Listen up, you overgrown birds. Garrison's voice boomed over the plaza. This planet and everything on it now belongs to the Iron Corsairs. You are going to load every ounce of your raw isotopes into our cargo haulers. Anyone who refuses, anyone who moves too slow, or anyone who looks at me wrong, dies. Start moving. On the ridge, Amelia was trembling uncontrollably. Oh my God, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. They're going to kill them. They're going to kill all of them. Arthur, we have to call for help. We have to contact the Coalition fleet. Comm relays are already down, Arthur stated coldly, his synthetic eyes zooming in on the plaza, rapidly tagging hostiles, estimating armor thickness, and tracking patrol routes. Standard pirate doctrine. They dropped a localized EMP spike before they hit the atmosphere. We're completely cut off. Then what do? We have to hide, she pleaded, tugging at his sleeve. Arthur Pendleton didn't move. He stood perfectly still, watching the pirates rough up the gentle veil, watching Garrison strut through the plaza like a conqueror. For 2 months, Arthur had felt like an alien, a monster pretending to be a man in a world of angels. He had hated himself for the violence that lived in his blood. But right now, looking down at the heavily armed raiders terrorizing a peaceful people, a dark, terrifying calm washed over him. The paperwork mistake hadn't sent a farmer to Xylos 9. It had sent a helldiver. And helldivers didn't hide. Amelia, Arthur said, his voice terrifyingly steady, devoid of the gravelly exhaustion he had shown for weeks. It was the voice of a commanding officer in a war zone. Go back to the northern sector. Gather the outer ring farmers and hide in the irrigation trenches I dug. Do not come out until I give the all clear. Arthur, what are you going to do? You don't have a weapon. They have plasma rifles. Arthur slowly turned to face her. The look in his good eye made the blood freeze in her veins. It was cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of mercy. They have standard-issue infantry gear, Arthur corrected, a grim, predatory shadow crossing his face. I have 3 tons of volatile ammonium-based agricultural fertilizer, 2 industrial plasma cutters, high-tension farming cables, and an absolute lack of rules of engagement. They think they walked into a civilian zone. Arthur reached down and unclasped his beige civilian tunic, letting it drop to the dirt, revealing the tight black synthetic muscle mesh he always wore underneath. "I'm going to teach them," Arthur whispered, turning back toward the valley, "that the galaxy isn't ready." The luminescent purple grain of Xylos, 9, stood over 6 feet tall, swaying in the gentle planetary breeze. To the pacifist, Vale, these fields were a sacred source of sustenance and beauty. To Sergeant Major Arthur Pendleton, they were a meticulously mapped tactical jungle. Arthur moved through the stalks with a terrifying, liquid grace. The heavy, thumping footfalls of a weary farmer had been replaced by the silent, rolling step of a seasoned Earth orbital shock infantryman. He made his way to his fortified agricultural shed on the edge of Sector 4. Inside the reinforced structure, surrounded by tools meant to nurture life, Arthur began constructing instruments of death. He didn't have a plasma rifle, but he had a surplus of highly volatile ammonium nitrate fertilizer manufactured by a subsidiary of the Dow Chemical Company, specifically for terraforming dead soil. He had industrial-grade chemical accelerants, a heavy-duty plasma torch, and reels of high-tension tungsten farming cable designed to tow massive Caterpillar automated harvesters. His cybernetic eye, a restricted DARPA-grade neural interface that had been supposedly deactivated by the VA, flickered to life, projecting a vibrant blue heads-up display across his vision. The internal battery had been slowly charging for 2 months. Tactical assessment. Xylos 9, Sector 4. Hostile Force. A 40-50 Iron Corsair Mercenary. Armament. Surplus kinetic shotguns. Standard-issue thermal assault rifles. Light-powered armor. Objective: disrupt, disorient, and dismantle enemy patrols. Isolate the command structure. Rules of engagement: none. A mile away, Hector Garrison was growing impatient. The pirate captain paced the crushed marble of the central plaza, watching his crew bully the terrified Vale into loading heavy crates of raw isotopes onto the cargo skiffs. "Miller! Jenkins!" Garrison barked into his helmet comms, pointing toward the dense agricultural fields surrounding the settlement. "Take a squad of 4. Do a sweep of the northern perimeter. I don't like how quiet it is out there. Check the farming structures for anyone hiding out." "Copy that, boss," Miller replied, racking the bolt of his kinetic shotgun. "Just looks like a bunch of tall grass and dirt." Miller, Jenkins, and 2 other heavily armed pirates trudged out of the plaza and into the thick, glowing purple fields. They were laughing, their weapons held loosely. They had spent the last 5 years raiding hardened corporate outposts and dodging Lockheed Martin defense drones. Stealing from giant pacifist birds was almost offensively easy. The squad pushed roughly a half-mile into Sector 4, the towering stalks of grain severely limiting their visibility. "Stupid planet," Jenkins muttered, swatting a glowing pollen pod away from his visor. "Let's just torch a few of these fields so they get the message and head back." Up in the canopy of a massive, sprawling shade tree that overhung the field, Arthur watched them. His heart rate had settled into a slow, steady 60 beats per minute. The adrenaline was a cold, familiar blanket over his nervous system. He held a length of tungsten harvester cable in his scarred hands, terminating in heavy, forged steel counterweights. As the pirate taking the rear guard walked beneath the lowest branch, Arthur dropped. He didn't make a sound. The heavy steel counterweight swung in a vicious, calculated arc, wrapping the tungsten wire around the pirate's throat. Before the man could even reach for his radio, Arthur's massive boots hit the pirate's shoulders, using the momentum to snap the cervical vertebrae with a sickening, muffled crunch. Arthur caught the dead man's heavy assault rifle before it hit the ground, gently laying the body into the soft purple loam. It took 30 seconds for Miller to notice the absence. "Carson, keep up." Miller turned around. The path behind them through the trampled grain was empty. "Carson? Probably stopped to take a leak." Jenkins laughed nervously, though his grip on his shotgun tightened. "In the suits? Don't be an idiot," Miller snapped. "Spread out. Comms check. Static." Arthur had salvaged a localized frequency jammer from a crashed civilian beacon 2 weeks ago, powering it with a modified tractor battery. The pirates' radios were dead. Panic began to creep into the squad's movements. They formed a tight triangle, weapons raised, sweeping the dense fields. Suddenly, the towering Boeing atmospheric condensation processor located 100 yards to their left let out a screeching mechanical whine. Plumes of thick, freezing white vapor began venting violently into the field, rapidly dropping visibility to less than 5 feet. Arthur had overridden the safety valves. "What the hell is that?" Jenkins yelled, the thick fog rolling over their boots. A shadow moved in the vapor. It was too large, too fast. Thwack. An industrial plasma cutter, duct taped to a long titanium structural strut, ignited with a blinding blue flare. It sliced seamlessly through the armor plating of the third pirate's chest, cauterizing the wound instantly. The man dropped without a scream. "Contact! Contact!" Miller screamed, firing his shotgun blindly into the freezing fog. The heavy slugs tore through the stalks of grain, hitting nothing but earth and air. Jenkins backed up, breathing heavily, his thermal visor unable to penetrate the dense, hyper-cooled atmospheric vapor. He bumped into something solid. He spun around, expecting to see Miller. Instead, he was looking up at a 6'4" nightmare clad in black synthetic muscle mesh. Arthur's cybernetic eye glowed with a piercing, malevolent crimson light in the fog. Before Jenkins could raise his weapon, Arthur's hand shot out, grabbing the pirate's helmet by the faceplate. With a brutal, twisting heave of genetically augmented strength, Arthur slammed the pirate's head into the heavy steel casing of a nearby irrigation pump. Miller was left alone in the freezing, glowing fog. His breathing was ragged. He spun in circles, his shotgun trembling. "Garrison! Command! Do you read me? We have a hostile. I repeat, we have a massive hand clamped down over Miller's mouth from behind. A serrated agricultural pruning knife, sharpened to a razor edge, found the soft, unarmored joint at the base of his neck. In less than 4 minutes, a heavily armed pirate fire team had been utterly erased. Arthur stripped the bodies of their spare ammunition, a kinetic shotgun, and a bandolier of fragmentation grenades. He checked the action on the shotgun, the familiar, heavy clack of the pump mechanism sending a dark thrill down his spine. The paperwork mistake had tried to make him a farmer. But Arthur knew how to harvest only one thing. Back in the central plaza, Hector Garrison was staring furiously at the tactical monitor mounted on his command skiff. The 4 green dots representing Miller's squad had simply vanished from the localized tracking grid. No distress signals, no erratic vitals, just a complete and sudden cessation of telemetry. "Captain," a heavily scarred lieutenant muttered, stepping up to the console. "Did they fall into a ravine?" The Raytheon mapping software shows some steep drop-offs in the northern sector. "4 men don't trip and fall into a ditch at the exact same second, you idiot," Garrison snarled, slamming his fist against the console. He looked out at the peaceful, cowering Vale, his paranoia spiking. "They lied to us. There's a coalition security detail on this rock. They must have left a Black Ops detachment behind to guard the isotopes." Garrison grabbed his heavy plasma repeater. "I want 2 full squads, heavy armor, thermal optics, and bring the Boston Dynamics assault drones. We push into Sector 4. Burn the fields to the ground if you have to. Nothing survives." Within minutes, 20 pirates and 2 quadrupedal, heavily armored combat drones began marching toward the agricultural zone. They moved in a rigid textbook tactical formation, completely unaware that they were walking straight into the most heavily fortified real estate on the planet. Deep in the fields, Arthur watched the thermal signatures approaching through his cybernetic HUD. He was crouched at the bottom of one of the deep irrigation trenches he had spent weeks digging. Dr. Cartwright had thought he was crazy for digging them in a zigzag, interlocking pattern. Any military engineer would have instantly recognized them as World War I-style infantry trenches, specifically designed to prevent explosive shockwaves from traveling down the line. Arthur waited. He slowed his breathing, allowing the heavy, rhythmic thud of the pirate squad's boots to sync with his heartbeat. He had seeded the entire pathway leading to the trenches with concentrated packets of his homemade ANFO explosives wired to a central detonator cobbled together from a civilian comms pad. "Keep your eyes peeled. the pirate lieutenant barked over the open channel. Drones are picking up thermal anomalies, but the ambient heat from these glowing plants is messing with the sensors. The squad crossed the invisible threshold Arthur had marked in his mind. Initiating detonation sequence. Arthur thumbed the transmit button. The ground beneath the pirates simply ceased to exist. A chain of deafening, concussive explosions ripped through the fields, hurling tons of rich purple soil, shattered grain, and heavily armored pirates into the sky. The blast wave shattered the tranquil silence of the valley, a roaring thunderclap of human ingenuity and brutal violence. Before the dirt had even finished raining back down, Arthur was up. He vaulted out of the trench, the kinetic shotgun roaring from his hip. He didn't aim. He simply calculated geometry and let muscle memory take over. At this range, the heavy tungsten buckshot shredded through the pirate's surplus armor like wet paper. He dropped 3 men in the space of 2 seconds, racking the pump with blinding speed. One of the Boston Dynamics combat drones locked onto his movement, its heavy rotary cannon spinning up. Arthur didn't retreat. He sprinted directly at the machine, sliding on his knees through the slick, freshly turned mud, passing directly under its firing arc. As he slid beneath the machine, he jammed a primed fragmentation grenade into the exposed joint of its rear leg chassis. He dove back into the trench just as the grenade detonated, flipping the 2-ton drone onto its back, where it violently exploded in a shower of sparks and shrapnel, taking 2 more pirates with it. The surviving pirates were in complete disarray. They were firing wildly, hitting their own men, terrified of the relentless, ghost-like entity that was tearing them apart from the shadows. Arthur moved through the trenches, popping up to deliver a lethal blast of buckshot before vanishing again. He was a force of nature, a terrifying embodiment of the war the Vale had spent millennia trying to forget. A stray plasma bolt grazed Arthur's left shoulder, the intense heat instantly searing through his muscle mesh and charring his flesh. Arthur grunted, ducking back into cover. The pain was sharp, but the internal medical suite, housed in his cybernetics, immediately flooded his system with localized synthetic adrenaline and a heavy dose of combat coagulants. He didn't even drop his weapon. Reaching out, he grabbed the radio off a dead pirate lying at the lip of his trench. He switched it to the open command frequency. Garrison. Arthur's voice was a low, terrifying rasp that echoed over the pirate comms. It sounded like gravel being crushed in a vise. You have 30 seconds to evacuate this airspace. Leave the cargo. Leave the civilians. Back in the plaza, Garrison stared at his radio, his face pale beneath his helmet. The gunfire and explosions from Sector 4 had suddenly stopped. The silence was heavier, more oppressive than the noise. "Who the hell is this?" Garrison demanded, his voice trembling slightly. "Are you Coalition Special Forces? We have you outnumbered. We have the high ground." "I'm a farmer," Arthur replied coldly, "and you are standing on my crops." Garrison's fear instantly morphed into enraged desperation. He realized he was losing control of the situation, and pirates only respected power. He turned toward the huddled mass of Vale civilians, grabbing the elder, Lyrian, by their delicate feathered neck, dragging the tall alien forward. "Listen to me, you crazy son of a bitch!" Garrison screamed into the radio, activating the settlement's public address system, so his voice boomed across the entire valley. "I don't care who you are! You have exactly 2 minutes to walk out of those fields with your hands on your head. If you don't, I put a plasma bolt through this bird's head, and then I start executing them, one by one, every 60 seconds. Do you hear me?" In the trench, Arthur stared down at the radio in his bloody hand. The cold, logical part of his military brain told him to hold his ground, to wait for Garrison to make a tactical error. But the image of Lyrian, the gentle creature who had welcomed him to this pacifist paradise, being executed by a degenerate pirate captain, caused a different kind of fire to ignite in his chest. Arthur dropped the radio into the mud and crushed it beneath his heavy boot. He checked his shotgun, 4 shells left. He checked his stolen assault rifle, 1 full magazine. He had defended his perimeter. Now it was time to take the plaza. The 2 minutes Hector Garrison had generously placed on the clock was a fatal, arrogant miscalculation. To a civilian, 120 seconds is barely enough time to panic. To an Earth orbital shock infantryman, it is an eternity of tactical opportunity. Arthur did not take the main access road back into the settlement. Instead, he dropped into the subterranean drainage culverts, a sprawling network of heavy-duty, reinforced polymer pipes designed by Bechtel to channel the severe agricultural runoff during Xylos 9's monsoon season. The water was waist-deep, thick with mud and agricultural runoff, but it provided a direct, sensor-blind route perfectly beneath the central plaza. Above ground, Garrison was pacing aggressively. He held a heavy Colt kinetic magnum in his right hand, the barrel pressed firmly against the back of Lyrian's trembling, feathered head. The remaining 20 pirates formed a tight, anxious defensive ring around their captain, their assault rifles tracking every rustling stalk of purple grain. 60 seconds! Garrison roared over the PA system, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and mounting terror. "I will blow this bird's head across the permacrete! Show yourself!" Beneath Garrison's heavy armored boots, Arthur was bracing his back against the top curve of the drainage pipe. His cybernetic interface, powered by a heavily restricted Palantir predictive combat algorithm, was mapping the vibrations of the footsteps above him. He could isolate Garrison's heavy, pacing tread from the lighter, shuffling feet of the captive Vale. Tactical HUD overlay. Primary target: Hector Garrison, heavy-powered armor. Hostage: Lyrian, fragile, extreme proximity to target. Environmental hazard: permacrete ceiling thickness 4.2 inches. Solution: structural destabilization. Arthur unclipped the last 3 blocks of his homemade ammonium nitrate explosives, molding the putty directly against the ceiling of the pipe, directly beneath where Garrison's pacing loop consistently returned. He didn't have a remote detonator left, so he shoved a conventional flare into the chemical mixture, leaving exactly 5 seconds of fuse. He sparked the flare, turned, and dove deep underwater into the muck of the culvert. The explosion was highly concentrated and entirely directional. The permacrete of the central plaza suddenly ruptured violently upward, right beneath Garrison's feet. The pirate captain was thrown 10 feet into the air, his heavy, powered armor taking the brunt of the concussive force but completely destroying his balance and situational awareness. Lyrian, standing just outside the blast radius, was knocked safely to the ground by the shockwave. Before the dust and chunks of marble had even begun to settle, Arthur erupted from the shattered crater like a demon clawing its way out of the underworld. He was coated in black mud, his synthetic eye burning a furious crimson, his muscles coiled with lethal intent. He didn't fire his weapon. Firing in a 360-degree hostage situation was too risky. Instead, he relied on the brutal, visceral efficiency of close-quarters combat. He closed the distance to the nearest pirate in a fraction of a second, using the heavy stock of his empty kinetic shotgun to shatter the man's visor, crushing his orbital bone. As the pirate fell, Arthur stripped the combat knife from the man's chest rig, spinning on his heel to throw the blade with terrifying precision. The knife buried itself perfectly into the unarmored throat of a second pirate, attempting to raise a plasma rifle. "Kill him! Shoot him!" Garrison screamed, scrambling to his knees, his armor's servo motors whining in protest as he tried to raise his heavy magnum. The remaining pirates hesitated. They were mercenaries, bullies accustomed to easy prey. But the entity standing before them, dripping with mud and blood, moving with a mechanical, unstoppable ferocity, broke their morale entirely. 2 of the pirates dropped their weapons and outright sprinted toward their SpaceX retrofitted cargo haulers, abandoning their captain. Garrison managed to level his pistol at Arthur's chest. He pulled the trigger. The heavy kinetic slug slammed into Arthur's left shoulder, exactly where the plasma burn had already compromised his synthetic muscle mesh. The impact shattered his collarbone, spinning Arthur backward. Garrison let out a breathless, triumphant laugh, struggling to his feet. "You're just meat," he spat. "You bleed like the rest of—" He didn't finish the sentence. Arthur didn't fall. He absorbed the agonizing kinetic shock, his combat stimulant-flooded system rejecting the pain, and used the rotational momentum of the impact to hurl his heavy, empty shotgun directly at Garrison's head. The solid steel weapon struck Garrison's helmet with a sickening crack, shattering the pirate's primary optical sensors and staggering him backward. Arthur closed the gap. He grabbed the front plate of Garrison's heavy armor with his good arm, hoisting the captain off his feet. With a primal roar, Arthur drove his heavily armored knee directly into the pirate's chest plate, caving in the alloy and snapping ribs. He slammed Garrison into the permacrete, raising a massive scarred fist, preparing to deliver a lethal, skull-crushing blow. "Arthur, please." The voice was soft, melodic, and trembling. Arthur's fist froze an inch from Garrison's shattered helmet. He looked up, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Lyrian was standing there, clutching their feathered chest, looking at the broken pirate captain, and then up at the towering human soldier. Doctor Amelia Cartwright had emerged from the tree line, running toward the plaza with a medical kit, tears in her eyes. "We are a people of peace," Lyrian whispered softly, looking at the carnage around them. "There has been enough death in our valley today. Please, Arthur, do not let him make you a monster in our home." The blinding, white-hot rage in Arthur's mind slowly began to cool. He looked at his shaking, blood-stained hands. He looked at the terrified pirate captain, whimpering beneath him. He was a helldiver. He had been built to destroy. But looking into the wide, trusting eyes of the Vale Elder, Arthur realized something profound. The paperwork mistake hadn't sent a broken weapon to a civilian zone to be fixed. It had sent a shield to a world that didn't know it needed one. His capacity for violence wasn't a curse. It was the exact currency required to purchase peace for those who could not fight for themselves. Arthur slowly lowered his fist. He dragged the unconscious pirate captain to his feet and threw him roughly toward the few remaining, cowering mercenaries. "Take your garbage and leave," Arthur rasped, his voice echoing across the silent plaza. "If I ever see a Corsair ship in this sector again, I won't use the blunt end." 4 hours later, a heavily armed Earth Coalition cruiser finally broke into Xylos, Nine's orbit, responding to the delayed distress beacon. They found the settlement completely secure. The pirate dropships were gone, leaving behind only the wreckage of their drones and a few freshly dug graves in the northern fields. When the Coalition commanders entered the valley, fully expecting a massacre, they found Sergeant Major Arthur Pendleton sitting on the porch of his reinforced agricultural shed, his arm in a crude sling, calmly whittling a piece of wood. Lyrian and Dr. Cartwright sat beside him in comfortable silence. The military tribunal attempted to recall Arthur, citing the obvious clerical error. But Lyrian, backed by the entire Vale Planetary Council, filed an immediate, unyielding diplomatic injunction. They requested that Sergeant Major Pendleton be permanently assigned to Xylos, 9, not as an agricultural diplomat, but as the valley's first and only guardian. The galaxy was a dark, dangerous place, filled with predators. But on Xylos, 9, the predators had learned a terrifying lesson. There was a monster hiding in the glowing purple fields, and he was on the side of the angels. If you enjoyed this thrilling sci-fi HFY story of a battle-hardened veteran showing the galaxy the true terrifying meaning of Earth's military might, hit that like button, share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more epic tales of humanity holding the line. Drop a comment below on what you think Arthur's next mission should be. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next adventure.